Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's wrap up week 45 with Second Age Saturday. Now, last week, we were witness to the Númenórean wedding of the century, with the Eldar making a surprise appearance and bringing beautiful gifts. Now, this week, we're going to read about their daughter and the call of the sea on Aldarion once more. 2 years later, Arendis conceived, and in the spring of the year after, she bore to Aldarion a daughter. Even from birth, the child was fair and grew ever in beauty, the woman most beautiful as old tales tell that ever was born in the line of Elros, save Arzimrafel, the last. When her first naming was due, they called her Ancalimë. In heart, Arendis was glad, for she thought, "Surely now Aldarion will desire a son to be his heir, and he will abide with me long yet." For in secret she still feared the sea and its power upon his heart. And though she strove to hide it, and would talk with him of his old ventures and of his hopes and designs, she watched jealously if he went to his house ship, or was much with the venturers. To Eambar, Aldarion once asked her to come, but seeing swiftly in her eyes that she was not full willing, he never pressed her again. Not without cause was Arendis' fear. When Aldarion had been 5 years ashore, he began to be busy again with his mastership of forests, and was often many days away from his house. There was now indeed sufficient timber in Númenor, and that was chiefly owing to his prudence. Yet, since the people were now more numerous, there was ever need of wood for building, and for the making of many things beside. For in those ancient days, though many had great skill with stone and with metals, since the Edain of old had learned much of the Noldor, the Númenóreans loved things fashioned of wood, whether for daily use or for beauty of carving. At that time, Aldarion again gave most heed to the future, planting always where there was felling, and he had new woods set to grow where there was room, a free land that was suited to trees of different kinds. It was then that he became most widely known as Aldarion, by which name he is remembered among those who held the scepter in Númenor. Yet to many beside Arendis, it seemed that he had little love for trees in themselves, caring for them rather as timber that would serve his designs. Not far otherwise was it with the sea, for as Nuneth had said to Arendis long before, "Ships he may love, my daughter, for those are made by men's minds and hands. But I think that it is not the winds or the great waters that so burn his heart, nor yet the sight of strange lands, but some heat in his mind, or some dream that pursues him." And it may be that she struck near the truth, for Aldarion was a man long-sighted, and he looked forward to days when the people would need more room and greater wealth. And whether he himself knew this clearly or no, he dreamed of the glory of Númenor and the power of its kings, and he sought for footholds whence they could step to wider dominion. So it was that ere long he turned again from forestry to the building of ships, and a vision came to him of a mighty vessel, like a castle with tall masts and great sails like clouds, bearing men and stores enough for a town. Then, in the yards of Romenna, the saws and hammers were busy, while among many lesser craft a great ribbed hull took shape, at which men wondered. Turufanto, the wooden whale, they called it, but that was not its name. Arendis learned of these things, though Aldarion had not spoken to her of them, and she was unquiet. Therefore one day she said to him, "What is all this busyness with ships, Lord of the Havens? Have we not enough? How many fair trees have been cut short of their lives in this year?" She spoke lightly, and smiled as she spoke. "A man must have work to do upon land," he answered, "even though he have a fair wife. Trees spring and trees fall. I plant more than are felled." He spoke also in a light tone, but he did not look her in the face, and they did not speak again of these matters. But when Ancalimë was close on 4 years old, Aldarion at last declared openly to Arendis his desire to sail again from Númenor. She sat silent, for he said nothing that she did not already know, and words were in vain. He tarried until the birthday of Ancalimë, and made much of her that day. She laughed and was merry, though others in that house were not so. And as she went to her bed, she said to her father, "Where will you take me this summer, Titania? I should like to see the white house and the sheepland that Mamiel tells of. Aldarion did not answer, and the next day he left the house and was gone for some days. When all was ready, he returned and bade Arendis farewell. Then, against her will, tears were in her eyes. They grieved him and yet irked him, for his mind was resolved, and he hardened his heart. Come, Arendis, he said, 8 years I have stayed. You cannot bind forever in soft bonds the son of the king, of the blood of Tuor and Eärendil, and I am not going to my death. I shall soon return. But will you, Aldarion? Somehow I feel like we've heard this before. There are a lot of things to talk about here, but I'm only going to glance over each quickly. It was a pretty long reading. First is their daughter's name, Ancalimë. Now, if that sounds a lot like something you remember hearing from The Lord of the Rings, it's because you did. In Shelob's lair, Frodo holds up the vial of Galadriel containing the light of Eärendil and says, Aya Eärendil Elenion Ancalimë. And similarly, as he and Sam are escaping the Tower of Cirith Ungol, they're stopped by the Watcher's evil will on the way out, he cries out, Aya Elenion Ancalimë, the same as before, just without Eärendil's actual name. Now, Ancalimë is a combination of Kalima, meaning bright, and it's actually related to Galad, meaning radiance as well, and the superlative prefix An. So Ancalimë is most bright or brightest. Ancalimë is likely the feminized form of Ancalimë, so her name is appropriate to her beauty. And while Arendis was thrilled to have a daughter, she also thought that the fact that it wasn't a son would mean that Aldarion would stick around until they did have a son to be his heir, because at this time the law in Númenor was that the eldest son would inherit the throne and not the eldest child. Now that will change in this very story, as we'll see later. Now the early years of their marriage are strained with jealousy and with Aldarion being busy with work, but we begin to see that work revealing the wrong priorities for Aldarion, especially in this line. He had little love for trees in themselves, caring for them rather as timber. Certainly a fatal flaw from Tolkien's perspective. And yet, at the same time, Aldarion's farsightedness is going to prove a good thing to many. His understanding of the direction that Númenor was headed, his knowledge that they would need greater vessels, would eventually save Middle-earth. But at what cost? We'll continue to see. Finally, at the end of today's reading, the sea longing has him in his grasp again, and he tells Arendis he wants to sail. He's only been married for 6 years at this point. Again, after making her wait 12 years from engagement to wedding, which only happened after a 14-year voyage. And her tears, reluctant though they are, they don't cause any regret. They don't help him to feel empathy. Instead, he hardens his heart, and he tries to argue that she cannot bind forever in soft bonds the son of the king. Dude, you got a 4-year-old. Stick around for a little while. Anyway, we'll get back to him, I'm sure. For now, though, that does it for this week's Second Age Saturday. Thank you for joining me. And be sure to come back next week as we discover, to your shock and surprise, I am sure, that Aldarion makes a promise and fails to keep it. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, join my content council, get a bonus episode every week, and more. And please, if you're watching this on YouTube, you know the drill by now. Like and subscribe. And please follow or subscribe on your podcast apps. And follow @TolkienTimes on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.